Everything you're about to hear happened when Caleb visited the old family home of his boyfriend, Mason, deep in the rural woods of Tennessee, a place so quiet, so isolated, that even the wind seemed afraid to stir. Caleb had been dating Mason for nearly a year, and every other weekend, he would make the long, lonely drive, nearly 4 hours, winding through forgotten highways and shadowy forest roads, until he reached the house. It stood alone among towering oaks, a fading wooden structure with peeling white paint and a porch that groaned like something alive. When the sun set, the forest swallowed everything, leaving only the house, a dim silhouette against a wall of trees. That evening, only Caleb and Mason were home. The air felt too still, unnaturally still, as if the entire forest outside was holding its breath. The two sat in the living room, talking quietly, the only sound the low hum of insects outside. Then, without warning, thump, thump, thump. The sound came from Mason's bedroom at the end of the hall. Slow, dragging footsteps, like someone pulling their feet across the old wooden floor. Caleb froze mid-sentence. The footsteps grew louder, closer, echoing through the hallway, until they stopped right in front of the closed bedroom door. Thin tick, thin tick. The doorknob trembled, the door itself shaking gently, as if someone on the other side was testing it. Caleb's skin prickled with cold. He looked at Mason, waiting for an explanation, but Mason only swallowed hard, forcing a weak smile. "This house sometimes does that," he whispered. "Don't worry about it." But Caleb did worry. Mason's voice said one thing, but his eyes said something else, fear, or maybe recognition. And Caleb felt it, deep, instinctive. There was someone behind that door. Someone listening. The nights that followed were even worse. Whenever Caleb stayed over, he found it impossible to sleep. The hallway outside their bedroom was long and narrow, a tunnel of darkness lit only by a single yellow bulb flickering at the far end. At night, the house creaked and shifted like an old beast settling in its den. Every time Caleb lay down to sleep, he heard footsteps, soft at first, then heavier, pacing slowly back and forth outside the door. Sometimes, he heard faint tapping. Sometimes, a dragging sound. Sometimes, a whisper too soft to understand. And one night, at around 3 a.m., Caleb woke with a start, though he didn't know why at first. Then he felt it. A breath. Slow, warm, right beside his ear. He lay completely still, paralyzed with fear. He knew that someone was standing beside the bed, leaning over him, watching him. The air dropped suddenly, freezing cold, as if an icy hand was pressing down on his chest. Caleb fought the terror long enough to reach for the lamp. He flicked it on, and the room flooded with light. No one was there. The windows were locked. The door hadn't moved. Mason lay asleep, breathing steadily, untouched by whatever had been standing so close to Caleb. But Caleb could still feel it, the cold impression of a hand, the sensation of someone leaning inches from his face only moments before. And the worst part was knowing he hadn't imagined it. The days didn't bring relief. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the hallway outside the bedroom grew darker, darker than it should have been. The shadows stretched too far, lingered too long, thickened as if gathering themselves. Caleb felt watched constantly, especially when passing the far end of the hallway. He never heard anything in that moment, but he could sense something, standing, waiting. One night, he turned his head just slightly and saw it. A shape, a tall, unmoving silhouette at the end of the hall. Not detailed, not human enough. Just a presence, a shadow darker than the darkness around it. He blinked, and it disappeared. But the dread remained. Caleb tried to dismiss it, tried to blame the old house, his imagination, the deep woods, anything but the truth he already knew. Someone, or something, was in that house. It had noticed him from the moment he arrived. And every night, every hour, it was drawing closer. Caleb tried to shake off the fear, but it clung to him like a second skin. Every time he visited Mason's house, the woods seemed darker, the silence heavier, as if the land itself was warning him to stay away. But he kept going, because he loved Mason, and because Mason always brushed everything off with a nervous little laugh, insisting the house was just old, creaky, temperamental. But old houses, Caleb thought, don't breathe, and they don't watch you. One late afternoon, just before sunset, Caleb stood alone in the hallway while Mason showered. The house was quiet, too quiet. No wind outside, no insects buzzing, just a heavy stillness hanging in the air. Caleb looked toward the end of the hall where the flickering bulb dangled, glowing weakly. Then, from inside the walls, tap, tap, tap. Caleb froze. The sound was gentle at first, almost like fingernails brushing the inside of the wall. He stepped closer, pressing his ear to the wooden paneling. And then he heard it clearly. A whisper. Not words, not a voice he could understand, but a sound shaped like speech. Soft, slow, sliding through the cracks in the wood. Caleb's breath hitched. He stepped back carefully, heart pounding. The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then something inside the wall scraped downward. Long, slow, like a hand dragging its nails all the way to the floor. Caleb stumbled away, almost tripping over a rug, and hurried back to the bedroom just as the bathroom door opened. Mason stepped out, drying his hair, smiling casually. "Everything okay?" he asked. Caleb didn't answer immediately. He stared at Mason, searching his face, wondering why Mason never looked surprised, never looked confused, always looked like he already knew. "Mason," Caleb whispered, "I heard something in the walls." Mason stiffened for half a second, a blink, a tiny twitch, but it was enough. Then he forced a smile. "It's squirrels," he said too quickly. "Or raccoons. Happens all the time." Caleb wanted to believe him. But squirrels don't whisper. That night, Caleb lay awake again. The house groaned and shifted around him, but beneath those natural sounds, something else moved. Something deliberate. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore it, until he heard the soft creak of the floorboards right outside their bedroom door. One step. Another. Slow. Controlled, as if the thing in the hall was trying not to be heard. Caleb's breath hitched. He reached under the blanket, nudging Mason. But Mason didn't wake. He didn't even stir. The footsteps stopped right at the door. Then, scratch, Scratch, scratch. Nails dragged slowly down the wood. Up, down, up again. Caleb swallowed hard. And then, the doorknob turned. Just a small movement. Just enough to click. Caleb's eyes widened. He whispered Mason's name again. Louder this time. Still no response. The knob trembled. Turned again. As if someone outside was slowly testing it, deciding whether to enter. Caleb bolted upright. He flipped on the lamp. The moment the light filled the room, the doorknob stopped moving. Silence. Caleb shook Mason's shoulder until he finally stirred. Mason, someone is in the hallway. Mason blinked, groggy, irritated. What? Caleb, there's no one here. It's the house. Just calm down. Caleb stared at him, stunned. How can you be so calm? Mason rubbed his face. Because I grew up here. It's always been like this. Caleb felt chills crawl down his spine. Always been like this. Always. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat upright, staring at the door, waiting for the knob to turn again. But it didn't. Not while the light was on. But as he listened in the silence, he realized something terrifying. The house had stopped creaking, stopped shifting, stopped making any normal noises at all. It was waiting, listening, matching its movements to his breathing, as if studying him. Just before dawn, when the sky turned faint gray, Caleb heard one last sound, a whisper, right next to his ear, closer than ever. It said nothing he understood, but he felt the breath, cold, dry, not human, and then it faded away, like it had slipped back into the walls. Caleb sat frozen, shaking, because the whisper hadn't come from the hallway, or the wall, or the darkness. It came from right beside him, from the exact space where someone had stood, watching him sleep. And in the pale morning light, Caleb finally realized whatever was in Mason's house was no longer curious. It was getting bolder, closer, more aware of him, and it wasn't going to stop. Caleb tried to convince himself he was imagining things, that exhaustion was making shadows move and whispers form. But the truth sat heavy in his chest. Whatever lived in that house wasn't easing up. It was watching him more boldly, more closely, every night. The next morning, Mason acted as though nothing had happened. He cooked breakfast like normal, humming softly, pretending everything was okay. Caleb watched him, studying every shift in his expression, every hesitation. Mason seemed tired, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who'd been carrying a secret for too long. When Caleb finally asked, "Are you sure nothing's ever happened to you here?" Mason stopped stirring the eggs. Just stopped. For 3 long seconds. Then he forced a laugh. "I told you, the house is old. That's all." But Caleb wasn't convinced. Not anymore. Later that day, while Mason went into town to buy supplies, Caleb stayed behind. He didn't want to, God knows he didn't, but something in him needed answers. He needed to know if what he felt at night was real, or if the fear had gotten the better of him. The moment the truck engine faded down the gravel road, The house fell unnaturally silent. Caleb stood in the living room, listening. Nothing. No creaks, no whispers, no shifting boards. It felt wrong, like the house was waiting for him to be alone. He walked down the hallway slowly, each step echoing. The air grew colder, heavier, as though something invisible was thickening around him. When he reached the bedroom door at the end, Mason's old room, the one where footsteps had echoed from the night before, he hesitated. "It's just a room," he whispered to himself. He pushed the door open. Inside, the room was exactly what you'd expect from an old country house. An old bed frame, a dresser missing a handle, a dusty window looking out toward the forest. But it felt different from the rest of the house. Like the air itself was older here, denser. Caleb stepped inside. The floor groaned under his weight. And then, from behind him, a soft breath. Not a whisper, not a word, just a slow, gentle inhale. Caleb spun around. Nothing. No one. He backed toward the window, breathing hard. His hand brushed the curtain, and he pulled it aside to look out, just needing a moment to ground himself. Then froze, because standing right outside the window, looking straight in at him, was a face. A face too pale to be alive. Eyes black, empty, staring. The skin drooping unnaturally, as though gravity worked differently on it. Mouth hanging slightly open, like it was trying to speak. Caleb stumbled backward, hitting the dresser behind him. His breath caught in his throat. He blinked, and the face was gone. No footsteps outside. No shadow moving away. Just the empty forest, swaying gently in the breeze. Caleb's hands shook uncontrollably. He backed out of the room, refusing to turn his back on the window until he was in the hallway again. He closed the door and leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. But the house didn't give him time. Creak. A floorboard bent somewhere behind him. Caleb turned slowly. Nothing there. Just the long hallway stretching into darkness. He took one step forward, and then the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went completely out. The hallway sank into pitch black. Caleb held his breath. He waited, and in that suffocating darkness, he heard it. A single step, right behind him. Then another, closer. Caleb's blood turned ice cold. Mason?" he whispered, though he knew Mason was miles away. A breath brushed the back of his neck, close enough to move his hair. Caleb bolted, blindly, hands sliding along the wall, lungs burning, heart pounding. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to get to light, any light. He reached the living room and slammed his hand onto a lamp switch. Warm yellow light poured across the room. Silence. Caleb stood there shaking, barely able to breathe. The shadows seemed to recoil, pulling back into corners. He stayed frozen until he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Mason returning home. The moment Mason walked through the door, Caleb practically ran to him. "Mason, I saw something. In your room. In the window. And the lights. Something was behind me. It touched me." Mason's expression drained of color. For the first time, he didn't pretend. He didn't smile. He didn't joke. He simply whispered, "You weren't supposed to be in that room." Caleb stared at him. "What do you mean, supposed to?" Mason swallowed, eyes dark, scared, haunted. "That's the room it likes. The one it always comes back to." He looked toward the hallway, as if expecting something to appear. "My family never used it. We kept it closed for a reason." Caleb's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mason didn't answer. His silence was the answer. And Caleb suddenly understood. Whatever lived in that house was not new. It had been there long before him. The frightening part wasn't what he'd seen. It was what Mason had been hiding. Mason's words hung in the air, cold and heavy, like the breath of something standing right behind them. Caleb felt the room shrink around him. The house seemed to lean in, listening, waiting for what he would say next. "What do you mean it comes back to that room?" Caleb whispered. Mason didn't answer right away. His eyes darted toward the hallway, the same hallway where Caleb had just heard footsteps in the dark. Mason's hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it by shoving them into his pockets. "Look, Caleb, my family doesn't talk about it. We just lived with it," Mason finally murmured. "We kept the door closed. We didn't sleep in that room. We didn't stay up late alone. And we didn't look out the windows after dark." Caleb's heart thudded painfully. "Why?" Mason's voice cracked. "Because sometimes something looked back." Caleb's skin tightened like every pore had frozen solid. He felt exposed, like the walls were watching him, like the house had been waiting for him to ask this exact question. "Mason, what is in this house?" Mason breathed shakily. "We don't know. My grandma used to say this land was wrong. That something happened here a long time ago, before the house was built. But no one ever told us what." He stepped closer to Caleb, lowering his voice. "But whatever is here, it's not just some spirit passing through. It stays. It watches. And it doesn't like strangers." The words sank deep into Caleb's stomach like a stone. "It doesn't like strangers." Suddenly, every whisper, every breath on his neck, every shadow he'd seen, made terrible sense. He was the stranger. Mason rubbed his temples, pacing nervously. "I was hoping, if we ignored it, if you stayed close to me, maybe it wouldn't bother you. It doesn't usually bother people unless they walk around alone, or go into that room." Caleb swallowed hard. "You should have told me." "I know," Mason whispered. "I know. I just didn't want to scare you away." Caleb looked at him, really looked at him, and realized this wasn't just fear. This was guilt. Mason had grown up with this thing, this presence, and he'd learned to live with it. But he hadn't warned Caleb. Before either of them could say more, a soft thud echoed from the far end of the hallway. Thump. Thump. Mason's face went white. Caleb whispered, "Is that it?" Mason nodded once. Slow. Terrified. The thumps grew louder, dragging along the wooden floor, like something heavy, or limping, was pulling itself slowly toward them. Mason grabbed Caleb's arm. "Don't move." But Caleb's pulse hammered violently. What does it want? Mason swallowed hard. I don't know. Sometimes it just watches. Sometimes it walks around. And sometimes, he paused, sometimes it tries to get inside the room you're in. The last few words were barely audible. The footsteps reached the middle of the hallway, then stopped. Silence. Suffocating, pressing silence. Caleb leaned forward slightly, barely breathing. Then, scrape. A long, sharp sound slid across the wall. Not nails. Something harder. Something dragging deliberately. Mason whispered, "It only does that when it knows we're listening." Caleb felt blood drain from his face. The scraping grew louder, closer, moving along the wall toward the living room, slow and steady, like the house itself was being peeled open. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. For several long seconds, the entire house went still. Caleb and Mason didn't move. And then, tap, 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 right behind them, on the window. Caleb turned around slowly, every hair on his body rising, and saw the curtain shift slightly, as if someone outside were gently poking the glass. Mason grabbed Caleb's wrist. "Don't look." But it was too late. The curtain slid just enough to show a sliver of the glass. And on the other side, a finger, long, gray, tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb felt his knees go weak. "That's how it calls," Mason whispered, barely audible. "When it wants you to come outside." Caleb stepped back, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Why does it want me?" Mason closed his eyes. "Because you saw its face today." Caleb froze. Mason opened his eyes slowly, regret filling them. "That window in my old room. No one in my family ever touched the curtain. We didn't go near it. If you see it, it sees you." As Mason spoke, the tapping on the glass grew louder, more urgent. Tap, tap, tap. Like it knew they were talking about it. Like it was impatient. Caleb could barely whisper, "What happens if I open the door?" Mason's voice trembled. "We don't open the door. Not at night. Not ever." But the tapping didn't stop. Instead, it moved. Across the window, to the wall, to the corner of the house. And then, slowly, deliberately, they heard footsteps circling the house. 1 lap, 2, 3. Caleb whispered, terrified, "Is it searching?" Mason nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "It's looking for another way in." Ethan says the 5th night was the one that finally broke him. The night when the house stopped merely watching and began reacting. It started around 1:45 a.m. Dalton had fallen asleep almost instantly, exhausted from a long day working on his family's farm. Ethan lay beside him, eyes open, staring at the ceiling where faint moonlight spilled through the curtains. He felt strangely restless, like the air was too heavy, too thick, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then, the footsteps returned. Slow, dragging, thump, thump, thump. They moved down the hallway, toward their bedroom door, just like the previous nights. But this time, something was different. something colder, something deliberate. Ethan nudged Dalton. Dalton only murmured sleepily, "It's an old house, just try to ignore it," before turning over. But Ethan couldn't ignore it. Not tonight. The footsteps stopped right outside their bedroom. Silence. A silence so deep it made Ethan's ears ring. He held his breath, waiting, listening, trying not to make a sound. Then came the whisper. A faint exhale, like someone's lips pressed against the crack under the door. Ethan froze. He couldn't make out the words, but he understood the intent. It was calling someone, calling softly, insistently, as if asking them to open the door. Dalton's dog, usually calm and friendly, suddenly lifted its head from the foot of the bed. Its ears perked up, its body stiffened, and then it began growling, low, trembling, terrified. The whispering stopped. The dog's growl deepened, louder, louder, until it sounded like it was snarling at something inches away from the door. Ethan finally reached over and grabbed Dalton's shoulder. "Dalton, wake up, something's at the door." Dalton jolted awake. What are you talking of?" Before he could finish, the bedroom door handle slowly, very slowly, began to turn. Creak, creak. Dalton shot up, panic replacing the sleep in his eyes. "No, no, 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 not again," he whispered under his breath, almost like he'd been expecting this moment for years. Ethan stared at him. "What do you mean again?" Dalton didn't answer. He just got out of bed, grabbed Ethan's wrist, and pulled him back. "Get behind me." The door handle kept turning, almost fully now. The dog barked, sharp, violent, frantic, and then everything stopped. The handle fell still. The air turned icy. Ethan felt something brush past his ankle, something freezing, something that wasn't visible in the dark. He jerked his foot back. Dalton grabbed his arm even tighter. Neither of them dared move. For almost a full minute, nothing happened. No footsteps, no whispering, just a crushing, merciless silence. Then, from the hallway, came a sound they had never heard before. A slow, drawn-out exhale, as if someone standing outside their door, was disappointed. And then the footsteps retreated. Thump, 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 all the way to the end of the hallway, before fading completely. Dalton locked the door with shaking hands. Ethan whispered, "Dalton, what was that?" Dalton didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, voice trembling, "That thing, whatever it is, it's getting bolder." Ethan didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He lay awake, listening, waiting, wondering if the disappointment they heard outside the door was because the thing wanted in, and because it would, soon, try again. Ethan says the next evening felt wrong from the very moment the sun began to set. It wasn't anything he could point to directly. No footsteps, no whispers, no door handles turning on their own. But the air inside that old farmhouse felt like it was sinking, growing heavier, denser, as if the house knew night was coming. and was preparing for it. Dalton was unusually quiet. He moved around the house, checking windows, checking locks, leaving lights on he normally kept off. Ethan finally asked, "Dalton, what exactly is going on here?" Dalton hesitated. Then he said quietly, "There's something in this house, and it only comes alive after dark." Ethan felt a cold twist in his stomach. He'd already experienced enough to believe it, but hearing Dalton confirm it made everything so much worse. They tried to eat dinner, but every few seconds, Dalton's eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward the staircase, toward the back door. His shoulders remained tense, rigid. Ethan finally put his fork down. "Dalton, talk to me." Dalton looked up, and for the first time since Ethan met him, there was fear in Dalton's eyes. Real fear. "I don't know what it is," he said. "My grandma used to say this house had a shadow, something that hangs on after dark." He swallowed hard. She said, "Whatever it is, it watches." Ethan whispered, "Watches who?" Dalton looked away. "The men in this house." A chill ran straight through Ethan, not just from the words, but from the way Dalton refused to meet his eyes. As night fell, the house grew impossibly quiet. The kind of silence that presses into your eardrums, making every breath sound too loud. Even Dalton's dog refused to leave the bedroom, choosing instead to curl up in the farthest corner, trembling. By 11 p.m., Ethan could feel it. A presence. Not footsteps. Not whispers. Just an awareness. An attention. As if something in the house was waking up. Around midnight, they heard the first sound. A single creak. Not from the hallway this time, but from the attic, directly above them. Ethan's pulse quickened. Is someone up there? Dalton shook his head slowly. No one's been in that attic for years. Another creak. Then another. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not the sound of settling wood, but the sound of weight. Steps. Moving across the attic floor. Right over their heads. Ethan grabbed Dalton's arm. "Dalton, what is that thing?" Dalton whispered, "I don't know, but it never came from the attic before." His voice cracked. "It's getting stronger." The footsteps stopped. The entire ceiling seemed to hold its breath. The air grew icy, like the temperature dropped instantly by 10 degrees. Ethan could see his own breath, drifting pale in the moonlight. Then, a long dragging sound began. Something being pulled across the attic floor. Slow, rough, scraping, like a body, or something heavy, being dragged toward the hatch above the hallway. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Dalton, we need to leave." But Dalton grabbed his hand tightly. "No. If we go into that hallway right now." He paused. His voice trembled. "It'll be waiting for us." The dragging stopped. A single knock came from directly above their bedroom door. Then, another. Slow. Measured. As if the thing in the attic was tapping its fingers, telling them it knew exactly where they were. Then came the whisper. Not from under the door this time. Not from the hallway. but from the ceiling itself. A soft, breathy voice, leaking through the attic floorboards, calling someone's name, calling it slowly, mournfully, again and again. Dalton's face went pale. Ethan leaned closer. "Dalton, what name is it saying?" Dalton didn't answer. He couldn't, because the whisper, the voice dripping down from the attic, was calling his name. "Dalton, Dalton, come up." Ethan grabbed his arm, but Dalton remained frozen, breathing shallow, staring at the ceiling with widening eyes. He whispered one word, "Grandma," but whatever was calling him was not his grandmother. Dalton didn't move for several seconds, just stood there, staring at the ceiling as the voice continued to leak through the attic floorboards. "Dalton, come up." The tone was soft, almost tender, like someone calling a child back home. But there was something underneath it. A rasp, a dryness, a hollow echo that did not belong to anything living. Ethan grabbed Dalton's arms, shaking him. "Dalton, look at me. Don't listen to that." Dalton blinked slowly, as if waking from a trance. But the whispering didn't stop. In fact, it grew clearer, closer. "Dalton, I'm waiting." Dalton's breathing quickened. He stepped back, shaking his head violently. "No, no, that's not her. She never sounded like that." Ethan tried to stay calm, but the air had grown so cold his lips were numb. "I thought you said no one goes in the attic?" Dalton swallowed, voice trembling. "They don't. The hatch has been jammed for years. It shouldn't even open." Then, something scraped directly above the hatch. A heavy, deliberate drag, as if something was sliding toward it, preparing. "Dalton," Ethan whispered, "we need to get outside. Now." Dalton nodded, but the moment they reached for the bedroom door, the attic hatch in the hallway creaked. A sound so faint, yet so horrifying, like old wood giving in after years of being ignored. Creak. Dalton froze. "No, it can't open. It's been stuck since I was a kid." But it was opening, slowly, as if some unseen hand was pushing it down from the inside. The dog began barking wildly, snarling, backing away, for raised straight up. Ethan grabbed the doorknob, yanking it open, but the hallway outside was drenched in darkness. Not normal darkness, but heavy, thick, suffocating, the kind that made the yellow bulb at the far end flicker like it was drowning. And right beneath the attic hatch, they heard the sound, a foot, touching the top step of the attic ladder. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. "Dalton, it's coming down." Dalton grabbed Ethan's hand. "Run. Don't look back. Just run." But when they stepped into the hallway, the temperature dropped even lower. Their breath poured out in white clouds. The wood beneath their feet groaned, not from their weight, but from something else pressing down on it. Something above them. Something moving. Step, step, onto the ladder. Then a third step, heavier, closer. Ethan couldn't help it. He looked up, just a glance. just a reflex, and for the rest of his life, he would regret it, because there, in that suffocating darkness near the ceiling, two pale fingers curled around the edge of the attic opening, long, too long, like they'd stretched to reach the light, and then another hand, gripping slowly, deliberately, as if testing its strength. Dalton saw it too. He yanked Ethan into the nearest room, his childhood bedroom, and slammed the door shut. The dog squeezed through just in time before the door latched. They backed away, listening. The house went silent, painfully silent. Then, a soft thud on the hallway floor. Something had reached the bottom of the ladder. Something was standing out there, between them and the exit. Dalton whispered, barely audible, "This is the room she died in." Ethan froze. "Your grandmother?" Dalton nodded slowly. "But whatever's out there," he swallowed hard, "isn't her. Not anymore." A shadow slid under the crack of the door, slow, creeping, as if tasting the air on the other side. Ethan held Dalton's hand. Dalton squeezed back, trembling. Neither of them dared to breathe. Then the whisper came again, but this time, it was right behind the door. "Dalton, open it. I'm waiting." And the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob turned slowly, so slowly that the metal itself seemed to groan. Ethan felt Dalton's grip tighten, cold, desperate, like he was holding on to the last solid thing in the world. "Dalton." The whisper drifted through the wood of the door, soft, wavering, almost pleading. But underneath, there was a rasp, a dryness, something that scraped across the ear like brittle bone. Dalton shook his head violently. "That's not her. That's not her," he repeated, voice cracking. The dog was pressed against the wall, teeth bared, shaking uncontrollably. Ethan took a slow breath. "What happens if it gets in?" Dalton didn't answer. He didn't have to. The terror in his eyes said everything. The doorknob jerked again, harder this time, like something on the other side was beginning to lose patience, or its imitation of gentleness. Ethan stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "You said your grandmother died in this room, right?" Dalton nodded. "She stayed here for months before she passed. Said she kept seeing something at the end of the hall. Said it followed her, watched her, whispered to her after dark." He paused. "My family thought she had dementia." Another pause. A long one. Then Dalton whispered, "But I know now she was telling the truth." A loud, sharp knock exploded against the door. Both of them jumped. 3 slow knocks followed. Deliberate, measured, hungry. The dog barked, one single terrified bark, then went silent again, shaking. Ethan tried to think. Is there another way out? Dalton pointed toward the small window near the bed. But the moment Ethan looked at it, his stomach dropped. The glass was fogging from the outside, as if someone, something, was breathing against it. Slow, deep, cold breaths, fogging the window in rhythmic pulses. Ethan whispered, "Dalton, it's outside too." Dalton's face drained of color. No, no, it can't. It never left the house before. But it had. It was circling them, hunting. A shadow smeared across the window, long, stretched, distorted, like a person standing far too close. A human shape, but wrong in all the subtle ways that make your blood freeze. The head tilted, then tilted further and further, until the angle became unnatural, sickening. The whisper came again, but this time from the window. "Dalton, why are you hiding?" Dalton stumbled backward, breath shaking. "Ethan, this thing, it used to follow my dad too. He left the house when I was little. He never came back." Ethan didn't know what to say. There was no comfort left to give. Only survival. "Listen to me. We need to get to the truck. We go fast. We don't look back. We don't stop." Another violent rattle hit the door. The wood cracked, just a hairline split, but enough to make both of them gasp. The whisper sharpened. Not gentle anymore. Not patient. It was changing, growing. "Open the door, Dalton. I'm right here." The door shook again. Something heavy slammed into it. Once. Then again. Harder. Stronger. The third hit nearly knocked the hinges loose. They had seconds. Maybe less. Ethan grabbed Dalton's face with both hands. "Dalton, look at me. We are leaving. Right now." Dalton nodded, trembling so badly his teeth chattered. Ethan grabbed him and the dog, dragging them toward the window. The shadow outside pressed its face closer, revealing nothing. No features, just a smooth, dark surface, like skin with no face. Then suddenly, the shadow jerked its head toward the door, as if it sensed the thing trying to break in. For one horrifying moment, Ethan realized there wasn't one entity in the house. There were two. One inside, one outside, and both knew exactly where they were. The door cracked wide, wood splintering. A pale hand, too long, too thin, slid through the gap, reaching, grasping, searching. Ethan shoved the window open and pushed Dalton through first. "Go, go." Dalton fell into the grass outside. Ethan pushed the dog through next. Another slam hit the door behind him. He didn't look back. He dove out the window, just as the door finally burst open. And from inside the room, he heard a voice whisper behind him, so close it brushed the back of his neck. "Ethan, don't leave." Ethan hit the ground hard, shoulder first, rolling through the cold, wet grass. Dalton grabbed him immediately, pulling him up. Behind them, the window they'd just climbed through went silent, too silent. That kind of silence that means something is waiting, breathing, listening. Dalton tugged Ethan's arm. "Come on, run." They sprinted across the yard, the dog racing ahead of them. The farmhouse loomed behind, its dark windows glowing faintly in the moonlight, like empty eye sockets watching them flee. And then, a flicker. The attic light, the one that hadn't worked in years, flashed on. For just a second, Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Dalton, it turned the light on. But Dalton didn't slow, didn't look back. Just run, Ethan, please, just run. They reached the gravel driveway. Dalton's truck sat at the end, an old beat-up Chevy, the kind that always took a few tries to start. Ethan had never hated a vehicle choice so much in his life. The dog whined at the truck door, scratching frantically. Ethan yanked the passenger door open. "Get in." Dalton ran to the driver's side, but stopped, dead in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat. Ethan followed his gaze. There, in the faint glow of the farmhouse porch light, stood a figure, tall, still, facing them, just standing at the edge of the yard. A silhouette, but wrong. Shoulders too narrow, arms too long, neck too stiff, head tilted ever so slightly to one side, like it hadn't figured out how humans stand. Ethan whispered, "Is that the one from inside, or the one from the window?" Dalton shook his head slowly. "I don't know." The figure twitched, a sharp, unnatural jerk, as if deciding something. Then, it began to walk toward them. Step, step, step. Dalton snapped out of it. He dove into the driver's seat. "Get in, now." Ethan climbed in just as the dog scrambled into his lap. Dalton jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed. Once, twice, didn't start. Ethan slammed his hand against the dashboard. Come on, please." The figure was halfway down the driveway. Its movements were slow, but deliberate. Too deliberate. Like a puppet rediscovering how to use its limbs. Dalton tried again. The engine sputtered, but didn't catch. Ethan turned his head, and instantly regretted it. The figure was closer than it should have been. Much closer, as if it had skipped distance. Not walked it, just jumped forward in space. Its head tilted a little more, and then it started to run. Not human running. Arms limp, legs snapping at odd angles, body leaning too far forward, like it would fall any second. But didn't. Dalton screamed, "Start, damn it!" The engine sputtered again, then roared to life. The truck lurched backward as Dalton threw it into reverse, gravel spraying in every direction. The figure sprinted faster, closing the distance with impossible speed. Its feet barely touched the ground, like it was gliding, but violently. Ethan yelled, "Go, go!" Dalton swung the truck around, tires screaming on the gravel as he slammed his foot down on the gas. The headlights carved through the dark, illuminating the dirt road ahead. They shot forward, but in the rearview mirror, Ethan saw it. The figure, running after them, not slowing, not tiring, just moving, relentlessly, its limbs jerking violently as it kept pace with the truck. It shouldn't have been able to run that fast. Not on two legs. Not with that body. Not with that shape. Dalton was shaking. It's not stopping. Why isn't it stopping? The dog whimpered, burying itself under Ethan's coat. Ethan turned around in his seat, and the figure suddenly darted off the road, into the tree line, gone, vanished into the dark. Dalton whispered, "Where'd it go?" Ethan didn't blink. "Don't slow down." For almost a minute, just the roar of the engine, just the pounding of their hearts, just the endless dark forest on both sides of the road. Then, from the treetops, something large moved, fast, parallel to the truck, following along the branches, keeping pace. Ethan watched in horror as shadows shifted overhead, like something crawling through the trees. Above them, Dalton whispered, "Oh God, it's not running on the road anymore." Ethan closed his eyes. "It's hunting." And somewhere above them, in the branches, something exhaled, long, deep, cold, and whispered, "Dalton." The night after everything happened, the night after the sheriff took Ethan's father away, and after that strange, terrible presence finally seemed to loosen its grip on the house, I stayed awake for a long time in the Parker farmhouse. The walls still felt cold. The air still felt heavy. And every time the wind crawled across the windows, I felt a shiver climb up my spine, as if the past wasn't quite done with us yet. The morning came slow, pale, like the sky itself was still recovering from the horror of the night before. Ethan drove us into town to give our statements at the sheriff's office. Neither of us spoke during the ride. The tires hummed against the dirt road, and the silence felt like it had weight. Thick, uncomfortable, sad. When we walked inside, Sheriff Dalton looked like he hadn't slept either. His face was drawn, his eyes red, and his hands kept rubbing at his temples as if he was trying to erase whatever he'd seen in that house. He motioned for us to sit, and then he began asking questions. But something about the way he asked them, something about the tone, made the hair on the back of my neck rise. He avoided the words possession. He avoided the word ghost. He avoided any mention of the presence that had twisted Mr. Parker into something barely human. It was as if he needed the official story to be clean, simple, explainable. Ethan's jaw tightened. He could see it too. When the sheriff finished, he leaned forward and spoke quietly. "Boys, I know what you think you saw, but this county doesn't need stories like that spreading. Do you understand?" There was a long pause, a long, tense silence. Then Ethan whispered, "Yes, sir." I nodded too, but inside, my heart was pounding. We left the office and stepped onto Main Street. The sun had finally broken through the cloud cover, but even under that warm light, the world felt different, changed, like we had crossed into some place we weren't meant to see. On the walk back to the truck, Ethan stopped and took a deep breath. "Do you feel it?" he asked. I hesitated. "Feel what?" He turned toward the distant tree line, the place where we first heard those whispers days ago. "That it's not gone." His voice cracked slightly, and suddenly I felt it too. A faint pressure in the air, a soft, cold prickle across my neck, a whisper of something watching. "Ethan," I whispered, "maybe it's not tied to the house. Maybe it's tied to your father, to what he did, to what he opened. He swallowed hard. You think it'll follow him? Maybe. We didn't talk much after that. Back at the farm, the house looked empty, drained, as if whatever darkness had lived inside had taken every ounce of warmth with it. Dust drifted slowly through the beams of afternoon light. The wooden floor creaked under our boots, almost like the house itself was breathing. We walked to Mr. Parker's old study, the one room we hadn't dared enter since the ordeal. Ethan turned the knob with a trembling hand, and the door groaned open. Inside, piles of old journals lay stacked on the desk, newspaper clippings pinned to the wall, strange symbols scribbled into the corners, and on the floor, a circle of ash, faint but still visible. Ethan knelt beside it, his voice barely a whisper. He's been doing this for years, calling things he didn't understand. I nudged one of the journals open. Inside, drawings of shadowy figures, notes about voices whispering through the fields, lines and lines of desperate handwriting. It wants to come through. It needs a vessel. It found me. I can't stop it anymore. I shut the book quickly. My hands were shaking. Ethan, I said slowly, your father, he didn't just lose his mind. Something took it. He lowered his head and wiped his face with trembling fingers. We spent the rest of the afternoon burning the journals outside behind the barn. Page after page curled into flames, ink blackened, words twisted, and the smoke rose into the still air like a warning drifting toward heaven. But even as the fire crackled, even as the last book turned to ash, I felt no relief, only a presence, just beyond the edge of the woods, watching us, silently. When the final flame died, Ethan spoke in a low, steady voice. We can't tell anyone. Not really. They'll think we're crazy. I nodded. But we'll know. He looked at me with hollow eyes. And we'll remember. That night, I lay awake again. The house was too quiet, too still, and the darkness seemed thicker than it should have been. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I thought I heard soft footsteps in the hall, or the click of a door gently shifting, or a whisper leaking through the cracks of the old window frame. But each time, when I opened my eyes, nothing was there. Still, just as I finally felt myself slipping toward sleep, I heard something. Not loud, not clear, just a faint whisper, drifting through the stale air of that farmhouse bedroom. I'm not finished. And the room went ice cold. The story isn't over.